But if you want to feel like there's some hope for the future of the world and laugh at me being disgusting,
and the aesthetic vibes, it's very nice for the eyeballs.
There's probably some kind of color theory video essay that someone could make about what I was trying to do there metaphorically.
My time has come. I have loved Dan and Phil since 2016. Long story short, I love these two British gays with all my heart. I saw them in 2018 with Interactive Introverts, and so when Dan went on his world comedy tour, We're All Doomed in 2022, you know my ass was there. We're All Doomed was a phenomenal show. I straight up sobbed at the end of it because of how impactful and inspiring the message was, and the colors and the lights of the show was perfectly reflective of all that. I love symbolism, I love color symbolism, so I had to dig my teeth in when Dan shot out this idea, so thank you, Dan. Regardless, welcome to a color analysis of We're All Doomed by Daniel Howell. The show starts out with Everything is Fine, a song by Dan in which he pretends that everything is fine with the world and there's no horrors within it. The childlike visuals are very jarring for a show called We're All Doomed. Trust me, this was really funny whiplash to see live. To start, we have yellow lights coming from the circle. And obviously this is to represent sunshine, with sunshine being the most easiest visual to represent happiness. Alongside that, the stage is lit with rainbow, which is usually associated with childlike wonder. Oftentimes in many kids' cartoons, rainbows are used for happiness and peace and joy and all good things, which, if you know anything about Dan, this is very the opposite of his aesthetic, and he has expressed before that he is no fan of rainbow and color. The general lighting of the show consists of white lighting, making the stage be black and white, which A is very fitting with Dan's aesthetic, but B is symbolically represents the world. It's black and white. This is Dan being blunt about the horrors of the world. The white light also has a cool undertone to it, which is very important for the show. It's cold, it's cool, it's going back to this blunt and chilling idea of the horrors in our world. Also, this undertone seems almost bluish, which is a phenomenal contrast to orange on the color wheel. And orange is a very, very prominent color in the show, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The first segment of the show is the screen, in which Dan goes off with the toxic nature of social media. The lighting here is a reddish pink, and one of the most iconic visuals associated with social media is the like button. Most oftentimes, it's a heart that is red. Red is the most basic color to represent love and passion, but as Dan describes here, social media leads us for this odd need of validation. It's what we run on. Red can also represent the anger that Dan feels about the subject. Also, red is commonly used as a warning sign, so this can also represent the dangers that come from social media. In this segment, Dan does the door game, in which the audience gets to choose between two doors. Here, the lighting is a dark blue or purple. This is a very common and basic color usually used within game shows. Also, blue is heavily used within social media branding as well, and since Dan also touches on politics, the color blue is used heavily with many political parties. These nice common colors is almost a false sense of safety, even when we have no idea what's behind the doors. And let me tell you, there's some weird things behind the doors. The next segment is all about robots and algorithms. Here, the lighting is a very nice light blue. And oftentimes in pop culture, when we're talking about depictions of robots or the future, a nice bright light blue is used and associated with the subject. In this segment of the show, Dan introduces us to AI Dan. AI Dan stands in front of a purple backdrop. Oftentimes, the color purple is associated with royalty and luxury. And in this case, this can be Dan trying to tell us that this is the supreme version of him. Also, pulling up the color wheel once more, purple contrasts very well with orange. So if we say that purple represents AI Dan, and Dan is associated with the color orange, this can be a colorful symbolic way to literally depict the opposite of Dan. The next segment is all about conspiracies with a heavy usage of the color green. When we think of conspiracies, the first thing that may come to mind is aliens. The most common pop culture visual cue of an alien is some sort of green creature, which this could easily be a nod to. Also, green symbolically can represent gross and horrid, icky things. Think about green snot in a way. So maybe the lighting can make us feel uncomfortable and weird out, just like how conspiracies can also weird us out. But later, Dan will segue to the concept of capitalism and the chokehold it has on society. And what's the most comic symbolic color to represent money? Green. Alongside of this segment, Dan does conspiracy theory Mad Libs. Here, the visuals are a vanilla envelope with the word confidential on it in bright red. The lining represents this as well, so yellow is to represent the vanilla envelopes, as well as the red to kind of enforce this sense of confidentiality. Alongside this, it can also represent the danger of what is approaching from whatever the hell the audience decided to concoct. Now, the uses of orange here for the capitalism segment is a little bit confusing, as the uses of orange in the show is very important. I don't feel like Dan's true method of using orange is used here, so walk with me for this one. Dan goes on to talk about the piece of shit that billionaires are, and mainly shooting shots at the powerhouse known as Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And one of the main colors to represent Amazon is orange, so I'm assuming that's the symbolic use here. I'm taking that. This one's very straightforward. Bubbles are water. Water is associated with the color blue, so light blue lights make sense here. Also, with the context of Dan using bubbles to represent capitalism and billionaires, blue can represent this cold reality of it all, and also the sadness that comes from this reality. A more deeper blue is used within the climate crisis section of the show. Blue is often associated with the earth and nature, recycling, being eco-friendly. A big subject within the climate crisis is also the idea of the ice caps melting, which could also be representative of that too. It's a very chilling subject. Once again, we're using this idea of a cool color to invoke that feeling within the audience. And the color blue is a great segue for the mass amount of orange that is about to be used in the show coming up. Like said, they're both contrasting colors, but as Dan segues his topic in the show, Dan starts to get really existential here. He's discussing the sun exploding and the planet warming. Here, orange is the sun warming up to Earth. It's like a meteor of doom almost, which Dan even briefly mentioned. It's almost a reddish tone. It feels dangerous. It feels scary, contrasting with that blue. It represents the horror of this hell-like world, and it's blinding to the audience. It's easily making us feel that dread that we are all doomed, and we're doomed to face this horrible end. This is when Dan declares that there is no hope. And orange, the dread, it's glitching through the screen. It was glitching throughout the whole thing, but now it has overtaken the stage. It's bright. It's fiery. It feels like the end of the world in flames. But here's the thing. It's not red. The usage of orange in the show is more than just an aesthetic flair of Dan's typical black and white, or rather a depiction of the firestorm the world is in right now. This is when Dan, both in a literal sense and in the name of color symbolism, flips the script. Don't let Dan fool you at the beginning of Act 2 of the apocalyptic tips and such. He's trying to play into this idea of danger. The first thing you see when you Google orange symbolism is optimism. Optimism is a very, very key word here. In this brilliant part of the show, Dan sits down and he realized that there's a way to stop the doom. We all make a difference. We all count. And as he says, there's an inevitable glimmer of hope. The easy way out is to say we're all doomed, but rather he suggests that we try to find joy in everyday life. Some of my favorite quotes from this section is, "Death is inevitable, but first we get to live. Do not let the doom drag you down, and to stay hopeful for the future." Hope is another big word in this section. So how does this relate back to color? It kind of reminds me of Dan's book, You Will Get Through This Night, and the aesthetic of it. The main message of the book is that even on our most horrid nights of our cruelest thoughts, the sun will come up again and shine. Yellow is on the cover to depict this. It's kind of funny seeing the words "we're all doomed" painted in orange for the show, because now orange is no longer supposed to be this scary, bold color, but rather within all the dark blue skies and these eclipses, a new dawn will break, and the stunning bright orange in the sky reminds us that there's always another day with many wonders within the present. Even Dan himself sheds his layer of darkness, and the hope inside of him that was buried is now free. Hope was there all along. It just comes out at dawn and revelations of thought. And now, with the final moments of the show, the cold white light is no longer daunting either, as collectively we are all able to break through the coldness and cruelness of the world, and we're able to find wonders of life and to stay hopeful with each new dawn. This show is so fucking good. I am so proud of Dan and everybody who worked on this. The writing is phenomenal. You walk in expecting one thing, and then you leave with a brand new, fresh perspective on life. It was life-changing to see live. I'm obsessed with this stage. I just couldn't, I have a billion photos of this fucking circle in my camera roll, and really breaking down the lighting and watching it on YouTube again, it felt right. And the symbolism here is just so beautiful and so stunning. Shout out to lighting designer Jess Binberg and the head of lighting Paul Milford and whoever else helped create these visuals for this show. They are absolutely phenomenal. So I think to conclude, things are not as bad as they seem. There's always hope within a new dawn. Hope is always there. It's our job to dig deep within us and let it glow. We love you, Dan.